Hello YouTube, I'm Jerry Kirkpatrick, and ever since I started making these videos, I've had from time to time requests to speak more on my time working at Shelby American and building and racing and driving the Cobra automobiles. I got a request from Shackman on the last video that I did, and I decided that I'll put up a little bit on a interview that was done at the Shelby Museum last year, back in 2018, May 19th of 2018. And in that, there were 5 fellows on stage that were interviewed, and we had a autograph session afterwards and such. So if this is the kind of stuff you'd like to see, let me know. So who we had on stage was Randy McDaniels, who is the president of the Mustang Club of America, and he was the commentator. He was the one asking the questions. And we had John Morton. He was just a parts runner there, who became a winner at Le Mans and wound up driving for the factory Porsche team. Dave Friedman, he was Shelby's original photographer and did all the documentation as they went along. So if you see any of the first pictures back in the 60s and 70s, pictures out in any magazines or books, Dave Freedman is probably the one that took those pictures. And if you want to read a book that is pretty much first-hand on Shelby American, find one that has been authored by Dave Freedman. He was there right from the start, building the first Cobras with the Daytona Coupe, the GT 350s, and the GT 40. Next is me. I built and drove the first Dragon Snake that was produced through Shelby American and raced through Shelby American. And the story I'll tell is how it cost Carroll Shelby $6,000 to keep me out of his hair. Ted Sutton, he didn't start until late in 1963. He was putting a V8 in an Austin Healey, and he came over to Shelby's to find out how they did some of the modifications to squeeze the high performance 289 into a British chassis, into AC chassis. And he finally wound up getting a job there. He'll also talk some about putting the first 427 in one of the 289 chassis. He'll also mention working on the Sunbeam Tiger. Actually, George Boschkoff put the first 260 in the Sunbeam Tiger. and they sent that over to the Roots Group of England, got that approved, and then shortly thereafter, a couple of months later, they sent it back to Shelby American, and that's where I was tasked with the job of putting a high performance 289 in it. And then lastly is Jim Marietta, who has put together the original Venice crew building the GT350s, Mustangs, with the independent rear end. That was one of the first things he did. He started real late. He was over at the airport, and that was one of the first jobs he had, was working on the independent rear end Mustangs, flaring fenders and that type of thing. And he decided to build 36 of the 1965 Mustangs, just like they were building at the airport back in 1965. So now, on with the interview.
I'm sorry. How's everybody doing? I know you've been in here for a long time, but I can guarantee you wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for some of these guys that worked at Shelby American 54 years ago. So we're going to introduce a couple of them. We're going to have a little bit of their story so that you understand where the DNA came from with these new cars and the continuation cars and the Series 1, Series 2, and it's a long story that's gone on for over 50 years. So I'm looking for Dave Freedman. Dave, you can come up here, and Ted Sutton. And I was looking for John Morton, and I haven't seen John. Anybody sees John, have him come up here. So do we have anybody here in the audience that's about 17 years old? Raise your hand. You're too tall to be 17. Are you 17 years old? Yeah. Come up here for a second. Bring your driver's license with you too. Step right up here. Okay. What's your name? John?
John Zabukovic.
Where do you live?
Long Beach, California.
Do you like Shelbys?
Yes, sir.
What's your favorite Shelby?
Say a 350.
Which one?
Probably the newer one.
The old one.
The old one.
Smart guy. Are you interested in automobiles?
Yes, sir.
Would you like to work for Shelby American and build race cars?
I'd be up for it.
You would. Okay. So when Jim Marietta was 17 years old, like you are, he went to work for Shelby American. So thanks for coming up. Appreciate that. Your new car will be in the parking lot for you. Talk to Gary Patterson, please. But Jim Marietta started at 17 years old. He followed all the Cobra racing all across the United States. And finally they got tired of looking at him and gave him an offer to help in the pits at the racetrack. Then at the end of 1964, they invited Jim Marietta to come out to Shelby American at 1042 Princeton Drive to start working over there. And we're going to get to some of the specific history with Jim Marietta in a minute. Right over here, we got Ted Sutton. Ted?
Howdy.
Say hello.
Howdy do there.
Try that right
Howdy do there, folks.
there you go. Ted started at Shelby American because he was putting a V8 in an Austin Healey, and he wanted to see how the Cobras were building their clutches. So who did he meet but Phil Remington? And Remington was impressed with Mr. Sutton here, and he gave him a job. So Ted is one of the Shelby hot rodders that was involved in fabricating the first 427 Cobra ever built. It was done by Ted Sutton. And if you're familiar with Princeton Drive, it's a very small facility. So what they usually did is they put you over in a corner and put you to work. And if you needed some help, you just grabbed some guy and you had him come over and maybe give you a hand. Otherwise, you pretty much were responsible for all of that on your own. Right over here, we've got Jared Kirkpatrick. Anybody familiar with the Dragon Snake quarter-mile champion race car? Okay? I'm going to have Jared tell a story about that because he's the guy that took care of that car and raced that car and won championships with that car. And then over here on the end, we've got John Morton. John Morton is famous for breaking the 427 Cobra that Ted Sutton built.
Oh, come on.
That's the guy right there. He's responsible for that. But down here on the end, if you're not familiar with Dave Freedman, you don't know any of the history of Shelby American. If it wasn't for Dave's photography, while he was working for Shelby American, we wouldn't have anything to look at. We wouldn't be able to make reference to all of the history. And not only did Dave work for Shelby American, but he continued on into the movie industry. And I'm going to have Dave tell some of the stories about some of the other things that he did after Shelby American. And by the way, Dave is selling books over there. Is that good? Good? Okay. All right. So Ted, if we can start with you, can you tell a story about how you got the job to put a great big fat FE big block, just like that one in that big Mustang, inside a little 289 Cobra?
Well, to start with, I wanted to do it, but what they had me considering doing is putting a wooden mock-up of a SOC motor. SOC is a single overhead cam acronym, and they had a wooden model of one there at Shelby's shop. It looked for all the world like it was made out of cast iron and aluminum. It was painted up properly. And that would have been a fun engine to put in there, except there really wasn't any room for those huge valve top cam towers and everything was in it. To make the long story short, I wanted to do that engine because I had done the Austin Healey, put the Cobra drivetrain in it that made the Austin Healey really wake up and almost be equal to a Cobra, except the Austin Healey was a little smaller and made out of steel. But it certainly took the same wire wheels that the Cobra would take, and it was mighty impressive. And the fact that I had to go to the Cobra factory to look for some special parts is the real reason why I got out there and got to meet Shelby, and I got to meet Phil Remington. He's the one that told me I had to go to work there. Now, he's a steely blue-eyed person that looked like somebody of importance there, and it looked like he had the prowess of being in control. And so I listened to him, and eventually he got me to come to work there because I just lived a long ways away, and it was going to be a little problem that way. He's the guy that I tell people that, except for my very own father, I almost worshiped the ground he walked on because he was so talented. He could tell you what he wanted, make things clear, and do it, and then be on and fix somebody else's problem. He was a master, and to be around somebody like that was a very special person that Shelby had, and undoubtedly the person that made Shelby name what it is today. And he certainly had more than a lot to do with it. Okay?
All right, thank you, Ted. And we're really glad that you built the first 427 Cobra because that is an awesome car.
Well, okay, then I'll do the next thing. It says, he promised me, Shelby, that I would get to make kits or pannards to sell, to put Cobra engines in Austin Healey's, because there was a lot of Austin Healey 3000s around at the time. And I was very thankful for being able to, I wanted to do that really. But I kept asking, when are we going to do that? And he says, we had to look around here. He said, we got too many race cars to build. There's no time for that. In other words, it was a low-dollar project. So that never even happened. They were building the Sunbeam Tiger, and there was called a Sunbeam Alpine, the one that Maxwell Smart tries to sneak off in the phone booth on TV back in the day. So I wanted to build that. Well, when the 427 Cobra came up, I wanted to do it, and everybody wanted me to do it, and it turned out to be, it wasn't any real trick, just any decent normal hot rodder would have been able to do it without any problem at all. But anyhow, I got to do it, I got to drive it, and I got to take a ride with Shelby in it, and he drove it through the little area that Shelby American was located in. It was 1950s tract housing, little short streets. I drove down this road, and I didn't have the passenger seat in there, and I drove down. I rode in the car with him, hanging onto his crutch through town at speed, not even pretending there was a stop sign going through these intersections, and taking the wildest hairy ride you'd ever want. It had the shipping tires on it and the shipping brakes, and anyhow, when it was all said and done, I came out alive, got to do what I wanted to do, and Shelby says, make it a race car. So,
thank you, Ted. So Jim Marietta. We're going to go right past you, Jim, and we're going right to Jer.
Great, thank you.
Hey, Jer. Tell us your story about working at Shelby American and the opportunity to be involved with the Dragon Snake.
Well, I started in 1963 through 1966. One of the first things I did was taking the 260s out. They came first with a 260, did a lot of modifications, and put the 289s in, the 271 horsepower. The way the Dragon Snake came about was there's Tony Storr, Randy Shaw, and myself worked in the production portion, and I've probably touched every 289 Cobra ever made. Every time we would see Shelby, we would ask him if we could take his little Fairlane. He had a brand new white Fairlane 500 that he had the crew put a 271 in, high performance 289. So every time any of us three would see him, we'd ask him if we could take his Fairlane out to the drag strip. After a short period of time, he got kind of annoyed at that and gave Leonard Parsons, who was the production foreman, non-working foreman, $6,000 and said, take the original car, the one that they used to do the promotions with. They would have that car painted 2 or 3 times in a day, so the photographers wouldn't see that it was the same car in different magazines. So Randy Shaw, Tony Storr, and myself would work after the regular work day was over, re-arch the spring, just did a lot of chassis work, and they did give us a race motor, which was kind of neat, we thought. We drove that one in all of '63, taking turns. Then in '64, there was the first annual Hot Rod Magazine National Championship. And it was my turn to drive at that time. We just wiped out the Corvettes. I set a ET and speed record. The next week when we got back, we got a telegram for Ford Motor Company saying that car and driver will campaign that car for the rest of the NHRA season. So we took it, I got Ron Falk building motors, and he and I would maintain the car. We went everywhere from Phoenix City, Alabama to Arlington, Washington, and we set a record, both ends, speed and ET, at every track we hit. And the last record that I have is 116.27 at 1181.
Impressive, Jer. Thank you. Jer is still involved. We'll talk about that.
I will be building, hand fabricating, just like I did back in, well, from '63 to '65 anyway. Hand fabricating a lot of the parts that will be going on the original Venice Crew Mustangs, and oxyacetylene welding all of the aluminum parts. You don't find that much anymore. That's it.
Not at all. Mr. Morton. Dave, could you wake John up, please? How you doing, John?
Good. Is this on?
John has a long story, but we're going to cut it short for him. He started off to be a race car driver. They gave him a broom, and it was history from there. So, John, what's a special memory that you have working at Shelby? And it actually may be the Sebring race when you got to drive the 427 with Ken Miles. But do you have any other memories that stick out? You were involved with a lot of stuff over there.
Yeah, I've got a few memories that stick out. One of the most vivid one was when Shelby's girlfriend, Joan, had the team carpenter and I go over to the house and put the door back on the hinges where she had locked Carroll out one night, and he tore the door off getting back in. So I and the carpenter went over and put the door back on the hinges. That was one of the highlights.
You got to do a lot of interesting stuff when you worked there.
Yeah. And driving the 427 that Ted built with Ken Miles at Sebring. I think the car was basically Ken Miles' idea in the first place. And Ted was a hot rodder who had done the engine swap with the Ford and the Healy. So he got the job, and as he said, he wanted the job of shoehorning that big block into a 289 chassis. I ended up at Sebring to be a night watchman, and they were out of drivers because none of the cars broke down. Ken Miles had wrecked the car in practice, and they didn't have a co-driver for him. So they took the night watchman, who was me, and stuck him in the car. And I drove it the rest of the day until the engine blew. And that was my first professional race. And sadly, one of the most memorable, really. I mean, actually, not sadly, but it made a distinct impression on my resume.
Yeah, you have a very impressive resume. I used to have it memorized, but not any longer. How many times have you won Le Mans?
Won or run?
One.
There's a big difference.
How about both?
I've won twice, class victories, not overall. The best overall we did was in 1986 in a Porsche 956, finished third with George Fulmer and Kemper Miller. But we won the class in 1994 in a Nissan GTS Turbo. We were 5th overall, but we won our class. And then in '84, we won our class with John Osteen and a Lola with Mazda power. It was a Mazda team car run by Jim Busby.
I used to have all of that memorized, but that was a long time ago.
That was a long time ago, yeah.
Do we have any Datsun fans out there? Okay, John Morton and BRE, Peter Brock Datsun's championships over here. So John went on and accomplished a lot. All these guys have. But let's go to Dave Freedman. This is the guy that, yeah, you can give him that microphone. Dave is the guy that was absolutely the historian. And, you know, Dave, how were those years for you at Princeton Drive? How were those years working there for you?
Magical. I mean, there's been nothing like what we had at Venice ever before or after. There can never be anything like that. And the magical brotherhood that still exists with all the guys that work there is just unbelievable. And what we did there with what we had was just unbelievable. And, you know, I mean, I could go on and on and on. You can buy my book over there and read about it, but really, it's just unbelievable what we had there. And what we accomplished with the space that we had, which is virtually none. And especially when we got all the Mustangs in, we had no space.
Yeah, you're only looking at a 5-year period of Shelby American, 1962 to 1967, and all of what they accomplished. But let's go back to that 17-year-old teenager, Jim Marietta, that just because he was following the race team across America, he ends up getting an assignment to go over and start working. What was the first thing you did at 17 years old when you got to Shelby American?
At the shop there, I was assigned to work with I was assigned to work with Ted and Peter Bryant on the Mustang. That was my first assignment, so I can't remember what the exact item I was asked to do, but you know, Ted was the crew chief, so I did whatever Ted told me to do. And so when I got there, that was my first job.
So what were some of the projects you worked on with the Mustangs?
One of the most memorable is when the car came back from Green Valley and it had the plexiglass was pop riveted to the top of the door. My first assignment when it got back was to drill the pop rivets out and take that off and put the aluminum channel sliding windows in the car. And so that was probably one of the more memorable. The other one, which was probably the noisiest, is when they had me flare one of the fenders in the shop. And they, back then we didn't have all the sophisticated cutting equipment they had today, so I used a muffler gun that literally echoed through the shop, right? And I think that's how I got to meet Phil Remington, because he came over to see what the hell I was doing. So those were the kind of projects that we had, and we did a lot of testing and development. For whatever reason, I ended up driving the pickup truck at 17. It was owned by Ford. It had a Ford manufacturer's plate on it, with a car in the back, driving back and forth to Willow Springs. So it was quite memorable, especially at 17. A lot of people didn't get to do those kind of things at 17 years old, so it was it was really exciting for me.
Now, you also worked with, you mentioned Peter Bryant. Peter Bryant was really a pretty brilliant engineer, and he designed the chassis for the Series 1 cars over here. Peter Bryant did.
Oh yeah, and he was an excellent welder. Yeah, I tried. Like Jerry is doing the acetylene welding on the on some of the aluminum parts. I tried that once when I was 17. I mean, what a mess you can make. I mean, acetylene welding aluminum is just, it's an art. And Peter could make it look like he did it with Heliart. I mean, he was just a really great fabricator. And so, it was exciting to work with people like that. So it was a very neat time.
So some of what you were involved in too was with the testing of the independent rear suspension on a GT350.
Yeah, after we moved from Princeton, then we ended up moving up to the airport. And somehow, I don't know who assigned me that project, but I ended up working on the independent rear suspension and putting it into a 65 Mustang Fastback. And so all the parts arrived on a pallet. Yeah, there we are. Yep, all the parts arrived on a pallet, and it was the typical, there's the pallet of parts, there's the car, put them in. And so I worked on that for a number of months with an engineer from Ford Advanced Vehicles. And so we ended up getting it in, but Ford, after months of testing, ended up deciding not to put it in the car.
So now we go full circle, 50 years later. Peter Brock, yourself, Ted Sutton decide that they're going to revisit history and actually build that GT350 that you wanted to build in 1965 with an independent rear suspension and with modifications to it. But once that prototype was finished, which is sitting right over there, the white 98i with the independent rear suspension, beginning about 2 years ago, a lot of the original Venice crew sitting around, and they come up with a pipe dream. And the pipe dream was, how about if we built 36 more of these cars, get licensed by Shelby American, get licensed by Ford Motor Company, and within 2 years, the shop is over here. The first FIA-approved car has been shipped to Germany 3 weeks ago, and additional cars are being built. You're invited over here to take a look at the projects, but John Morton has been the test driver on the cars. Jer is involved in fabricating the aluminum. Ted Sutton has been involved with all aspects of the fabrication of those cars. And Jim, primarily as a project manager, gets over there once in a while and makes a bunch of noise flaring fenders on those cars. So this is what you've got over here. So you've got the original guys, and if we can get Dave to go over there and take a couple pictures, and we get him connected to it too there.
Yeah.
I got my iPhone. You can borrow that thing. But this is what you have over here. Not only is this a legacy car, this is being built by the guys that built the original racing GT350s that won championships all over the United States. So let's hear it for these guys over here.
So if this is the type of information you would like to see come up from time to time on this channel, let me know. I've also got an interview with Hot Rod Magazine that I did last year, and I've also got an interview from the Cobra Experience. That's quite a lengthy one. I might break that one up if this is something you want to see. And that interview was done at Bill Dinbesti's, in down by Santa Rosa, California. That was done in his shop. So thanks very much for watching. See you later.